Good morning and welcome to the 11:11 show with Joanne. I'm joined this morning by Wayne Denner, and not quite sure exactly where our conversation is going to take us this morning. We'll see what direction we head off on. However, I'm really delighted to have Wayne on because I think this is a topic that's going to be very important for everybody. For those that maybe aren't familiar with Wayne's work, he is a all things internet safety expert and kind of entrepreneur, doing lots of really interesting things out there. So I'm going to hand over to Wayne and let him introduce himself. I always find that's an easier one to do, Wayne. So you fire away there and tell our guests this morning what you do, what you're about, and all those kind of things.
Yeah, good morning, Joanne. Firstly, it's nice to be on the show this morning. I suppose a lot of people in the local area might already know about some of the kind of work that we do when it comes to safeguarding, particularly when it comes to the internet and social media. A lot of my work in particular involves me delivering workshops in schools, workshops in community centres, working with students and also working with parents as well when it comes to how to use the internet positively and responsibly, but also how to be safe when we're going online. Of course, now more than ever, children are spending much more time online. So it is important, I feel, now that we are aware of some of the risks and the dangers when it comes to the internet and social media, and that we ensure that we're taking as much precautions, make sure that we're keeping ourselves up to date as much as possible as we can to ensure that children are being safe when they're going online. The technology is absolutely wonderful. Many of us are using it on a regular basis, but it still does have that risk factor that we need to be aware of. So a lot of what we're doing at the moment is creating educational resources, continuing to support parents in relation to the concerns that they're having, but also continuing to support schools as well, because children are getting access to educational content online. So it is important when they're going online to access that content, whether it's through Google Classrooms or any other platform for that matter, that they are safe. And that's really important as well. So really, we're continuing to do our work. We're continuing to post content online through the website, and we're still continuing, unfortunately, to get questions, concerns coming in from parents on a very regular basis about things that are happening in the online space. So that hasn't actually went away. In fact, it's increasing. So really, just if there is any parents out there who want help, want support, please do check out the website.
Absolutely, Wayne, and I guess it's we're all I guess it's one of those things that doesn't really need to be stated. We're all online a lot more now than perhaps we've ever been, and I think we've also been needing to kind of cut ourselves some slack with the guilt idea that talks about how we want to reduce screen time and all of that. So we're having to park those arguments with ourselves
Yes.
and kind of move things forward. And I guess it is, we've had these conversations before. We've often talked about how we embrace technology, how, it is now part of our world and so much more so now perhaps than ever. Is there an element whereby, because it almost is so familiar, that we forget, we look at a screen in the safety of our home and we forget that is a portal that takes us kind of out into the rest of the world, and that actually, and perhaps takes the rest of the world into our homes a little bit.
Absolutely, Joanne, and that's a good sort of analogy of it. I think we have to start treating the internet like a place that we go. And the online and the offline world is becoming very blurred, and many people sort of don't realize that they're joining different conversations in different parts of the world. They're participating in different discussions, different environments, and they're moving through different locations, different time zones, in and out of different worlds as well, whether they're playing games or they're using social media platforms. So we do have to understand that there is that sort of blurring aspect, which has been happening for a number of years, but also that the internet is a place that we go as well. And just like going to the park, just like going to the cinema, just like going for a walk, All of those things present risk, and sometimes we forget the risk in the online space. Just because we're sitting in the comfort of our own home, surrounded by four walls and a lock on our front door, doesn't mean that the risk is any less. In fact, we sometimes are inviting risk into our home a lot of the times. And this is where, from a parental point of view, it's really important that parents understand that risk, especially if children and young people are using technology unsupervised. Many young people have technology now at their disposal, many different types of technology as well, from smart TVs to smartphones to tablets to laptops to smartwatches. And all of these devices connect to the outside world. They connect to the internet. And all of those devices and all of those pieces of technology can present a risk if not correctly managed. So I think it's important to understand that we're inviting that risk into our home, but there are safeguards that we can put in place, of course. I don't want to see us go back to a time where we don't have access to this wonderful technology, because I think it's so beneficial, especially in the current COVID-19 world that we live in, to be able to continue to have conversations with you today on this platform, to be able to continue to learn, develop, educate. But all of those things, aside from social media, all present a risk. And every day we see risks, whether it's a data breach or a hack or something like that. And we have to be aware of those things.
Well, I'll be the first to admit to being kind of, I suppose, aware on some levels. And then sometimes some of this stuff can feel too big and too much, and then inevitably, rather than doing something, I do nothing. It's kind of, when something feels overwhelming or feels complicated, then there's a side of us, I think, all of us, that rather than embrace it, we just don't do anything and kind of ostrich syndrome, bury our head in the sand, pretend it's not happening. But what's been interesting over the past while actually is that I have specifically requested from a few friends who very innocently, I'm going to use the word innocently, were tagging me in, posts of topics that they thought perhaps I would have been interested in. So you've got this post posted by a page, and then you've got kind of all of these comments underneath, and and it's maybe quite a wide discussion of varying beliefs and disagreements, arguments, all of those things unfolded. And I've been tagged in the comments of those purely from the place, oh, Joanne might be interested in this, I'd like to see. So they tagged me in it, and I've asked a few people to not do that, because I guess what I've noticed is that when that happens, and historically, I then get an increase in kind of random messages into my inbox from people who I don't know. And I feel like that's a little bit, when we comment there, it's like putting a flag up and going, come find me, I'm here. And we make ourselves a little bit easier to find. So I've kind of requested that, look, if there's an article that you think I'm interested in, can you maybe share it on your own page and tag me on it, which can, I believe, kind of stream down, the reach of that. Or can you just send it to me as a private message so that I'm able to see it and interact with it, but I don't need other crazies kind of finding me? Am I naive in that thinking, or is that something that you would definitely recommend or suggest is helpful?
No, I think it's a good way to do it, and I think that's very helpful, and I think that's a good sort of overview of how you're managing that. And I have had similar things happen as well in the past, and I don't mind having discussions with people. I don't mind having constructive debates with people, and all of that type of stuff on social media. But when people sort of, maybe who you're not directly connected with, maybe they're a second degree connection or a third degree connection, and suddenly then they've tagged you in a post. And then what that does as well is it amplifies the post. And it does attract, you're right, it does attract a lot of attention. And in some cases that can be negative attention. But also you have to remember that you could be putting not only yourself, but other people at risk as well. And there are people who will sit and use the internet, and they'll just monitor conversations which are taking place, and they will look then for further information about individuals as a result of that. We have to also remember that social media is very public. It's a public space, it's a public platform. And just like we talked about earlier on, it is a place that we go. So we have to also be aware that what we're posting publicly on social media is just like going out into the middle of the road or the street, or saying that to somebody in person. And that's where sometimes we have that little bit of a disconnect. People don't really realize that, oh, well, I just said it in social media. I didn't actually mean it, or whatever. And as a result of that, people find themselves in hot water sometimes. So I'm all for that type of debate discussion, but it is important to remember privacy as well. And people are entitled to privacy. And if you're tagging people in posts, maybe that person doesn't have the correct privacy settings set up, and you may put them at risk. So I would say people to be careful. I suppose where I would take that a little bit further would be is I would send that person a personal message and say, look, I came across this really interesting discussion. I didn't want to tag you in it publicly, but I just wanted to know what your thoughts are. And maybe you might want to jump in, and you might want to give a little bit of input on that. And that takes the conversation into a more private channel and keeps it a little bit more secure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely been some of the angle that I've been taking. And you're right, I guess at the moment we're in, people are in fear, and that fear is in lots of different ways. So there are people who are fearful of the virus and everything that creates. There are people who are perhaps angry and fearful and concerned about some of the changes to their movements and their freedom and all of those. So there's people fearful that people aren't taking it seriously enough, and people fearful that people are taking it too seriously. So we've got all this pot of fear basically that is basically just like, it's fear, and it presents itself in different ways. And from that space, we have a very divided society. You have people now who are, can't wait for lockdown to be opened up. You have people who are absolutely terrified at the idea that, we're now moving out into a world. And all of those things then lead to more heated debates. And I've seen on some of my posts as well, where people who don't know each other are getting into conversations on my post, and I'm kind of having then to find myself being like this referee between two people who I care about, who might have different opinions than what I have. And I'm sure we've all been in this situation. Two people may have different opinions than what I have, or friends that have different thoughts and different opinions, and a conversation unfolds, and I can respect both of those viewpoints because I know those individuals, I know their backstory, I know where they're coming from, and all that unfolds from that. And then suddenly this argument, for want of a better word, is and they can get quite heated. I know we knock it as the keyboard warrior, but I don't think anybody that's engaged in those conversations see themselves as keyboard warriors. They're just really passionate perhaps about what they're talking about, but we're forgetting that. So I've actually started now, if I share something, going, you know what, like, it's okay. Just, if you agree, take it with you. But if you don't, like, that's fine. Just let's not debate on these topics here, because it can be difficult to have healthy debate in that sort of a platform when we don't know who we're talking with.
Yeah, it's always very difficult to sometimes get your point across in words, and physically sort of write it out. And then sometimes those words can be misinterpreted, they can be misunderstood. And I think that's one of the big challenges we have with social media. It's very difficult to read body cues, body language, because you can't actually physically see that person. So sometimes that same discussion in a real world scenario would be handled completely different, because you would be able to read the person a wee bit more easier. So that's very challenging. And I think there's no doubt it's a very uncertain time, absolutely. And people have so many different levels of anxiety, worries, really not sure what's going to happen. And I'm the same as everybody else. And I do think at some point we have to have these conversations, of course, and I think they're really important. But I think it's important to, yes, of course, respect the other person's point of view and opinion. And again, things can be misinterpreted that maybe sort of aren't the case in some cases. But I think discussion is really important, especially as we learn to emerge from this. I think having those discussions are really important. I think absolutely everybody's entitled to their opinion, their point of view. And I think we have to respect that as well. But we also have to respect people's people's input and people taking the time to have a little bit of value and a little bit of discussion. Unfortunately, as you know, sometimes things can get heated, things can get emotional. And that's where I always try to be very careful to take the emotional aspect out of it. In some cases, it's not always easy. It's challenging. It's difficult. But we have to remember that those social media platforms are public as well. And we don't know who's going to be reading them as well. And there might be some people who are reading it, but not commenting on it. And they're forming their own opinion about that discussion. So it can impact, I always say to people, and again, going back to the very early messages of online reputation, again, there will be journalists, there will be reporters who will be looking at a lot of content on social media. Things can get screenshotted, things can get posted elsewhere, and things can get taken out of context. Just be careful about what we're posting. Of course, have the discussion, of course, have the debate, but just be careful that it doesn't go to a place where maybe you didn't intend it to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I shared a post yesterday, actually, that I thought was really relevant for where we're at right now. And it was, it was reminding people that as we go out into physical businesses and more physical businesses are opening up, that, people might get this wrong, in terms of exactly how social distancing needs to happen or what a business can have in place and what measures they can have in place and all of that. But it was urging and encouraging people to, rather than, take a picture and then post that on social media, kind of slating the business and whatever, to have a conversation, because we're all learning, we're all in this together. Like, business owners aren't perfect, they're not perfect any more than any of the rest of us, and they potentially will get it wrong. But maybe through this we could take the opportunity to say to someone, actually, have you thought that maybe that's not just right, or those types of things? Because we do see a lot of that, where businesses get quite a lot of slack online that maybe could just be solved by actually having a conversation with the business, or taking it into a more personal, one-to-one, face-to-face level, and allowing the opportunity for individuals to fix it.
Yeah, I seen that post yesterday that you put up, and I thought that was absolutely spot on. I thought it was really well worded. I thought it gives people the opportunity to think about that, because you're absolutely right. We're all only learning at the moment, and rather than sort of criticize a business or a brand or an organization publicly, certainly give them feedback, and that gives them an opportunity to improve. I think another thing that businesses can be doing as well ahead of opening up is starting to produce some video content to educate their customer on what to expect whenever they come to their premises. And I thought that could be done so simply. Each business could create a short video, and if you're coming into our premises, here's kind of what you're going to expect. Because the reality of it is, we're starting to emerge from somewhat of a lockdown. More and more businesses are starting to open up, but the customer doesn't actually know what to expect when they turn up. I mean, I don't really see a lot of businesses locally doing that if I go to a said business, what am I going to expect when I'm there? What are their procedures going to be? What's the social distancing that they're going to be putting in place? So I think that's something that every business could do now, in terms of educating that customer about, before they come to their physical premises, here's what's going to happen. And that's a great way then to reduce maybe some of those things from cropping up and happening, and people going along then and recording things and uploading things to social media, that it ultimately is going to impact the business as well. So I think that's something clever that I'm proactive as well, that a business can be doing. But I think absolutely, give that feedback to that organization offline, maybe send them a little personal message and say, look, I was in earlier on today, here's a few things that I noticed, I'm just giving you the feedback. It's not a criticism, it's just some constructive feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, for someone who worked in the food industry for many years and managed coffee shops and different things like that, I always would have said to the customers, like, tell me and I'll fix it. Like, if I don't know, I can't fix it. And I mean, that goes into a whole scheme of our relationships, a connection, communication. In all relationships, how do we communicate with other people, and how do we, all kind of be in this together and all support and help each other to grow and kind of to develop. So I mean, we're moving into that time, and that's an interesting point. It's just as you were talking there, it reminded me of the video that was created for totally off topic, but it links in, that has been created for women who women and their partners when they're going into the labour ward, when they're going into pregnancy or into birth. because that idea, exactly that eases some anxiety if we have a familiarity. If it looks like, if a woman's going in for the first time, she's no experience, then she's naturally in her fight or flight. She's more defensive, she's more on alert. But familiarity and video, and the fact that we have such easy access to it now is amazing. And I guess one of the other things that I wanted to chat to you about today, and I noticed one of your recent blogs was around this, and I'd be first up to say I don't use it, I don't know very much about it. I have been seeing more and more of it, and I have numerous concerns around TikTok, and kind of how that is being used by, what I'm going to say is, generally young girls, and that whole platform. And I would be concerned, and I'm not from a prudish perspective or anything like that, but I would be concerned about some of the content, some of the moves, some of the stuff that is, I guess, and I know very little about it, but that young girls are perhaps engaging in and being encouraged, and then it's out there on a public platform and things like that. And I've had questions from parents as well who are equally concerned about some of that. So I had mentioned that I would bring that up with you today. Can you give us some thoughts on TikTok and what it's all about, and what we need to know, and how we need to maybe be aware, what we need to be aware of?
So TikTok is probably one of the most popular platforms right now with many people. Also a lot of adults joining TikTok as well, and producing content on TikTok as well. TikTok, previously was called Musical.ly. It was sold to a Chinese company called ByteDance about 2 years ago. And it was rebranded as TikTok from Musical.ly. So historically, TikTok / Musical.ly has had some problems, and it's well documented, both from my own point of view and also other people who've commented on some of the issues and concerns that they've had with that particular platform. In their defense, I suppose, just to start off with a positive thing, they have been making improvements. Not to say that it's perfect yet. They have implemented a new family safety mode in which parents can set up parental controls within TikTok, and they can actually link it to their parental TikTok account as well, and they can set up screen time limits. They can also turn off in fact, messages now have been disabled for under 16s, where they can no longer send direct messages. They can also set up that screen time boundary, and also implement some filters, which will also help with the content that a young person might be exposed to. So proactive from that point of view. But I suppose the bigger concern would be around, as you rightly mentioned a couple of moments ago, the content that children and young people get exposed to on the platform. Much of this content may be created by older teens as well, and then you have younger teens trying to replicate some of the content that they're seeing on the platform as well. By their very nature, social media platforms aren't that private. It's very easy for people to screen record content that has been posted. Privacy settings typically aren't that great. Many people will opt for having their account public, because by having a public account, that means that more people are going to follow you, you're going to get more engagement, you're going to get more reach, thus you might become more popular on the platform. All of those things presents a risk as well from a safeguarding point of view, because if you have that account set to public, you potentially could be attracting unwanted attention, and you could be attracting people into your community on the platform that could be putting a young person at risk as well. So again, going right back full circle around to the educational aspect of this, it is important that parents do sit down and have conversations about TikTok. I'm not saying that a parent needs to be using TikTok themselves, that they need to be actively using the platform, but I think having some boundaries in place about appropriate and responsible use of the platform is important, and setting those all important boundaries so that a young person knows what's appropriate and what's not appropriate on TikTok. Having age appropriate conversations about the risks, and also using age appropriate examples of where things can go wrong if you aren't careful about what you're uploading and what you're posting and what you're sharing. And also being aware that for the most part, the content and the filtering restrictions that are in place just aren't effective. There will be cases where we will be exposed, and children and young people will be exposed to content which is not suitable and is not appropriate. There is no filtering going to completely eradicate that. So that's important from a parental perspective, that the parents really are aware of these issues and these concerns, and that they sit down and they have those conversations. But also making sure that we empower young people as well, that if they see content on the platform which is not appropriate, which shouldn't be there, that they do report that content as well. Or maybe they have a conversation with a parent or a guardian, and that parent and guardian then can help them maybe set up a little bit more of the filtering within the platform as well. Make sure that the privacy settings are set up to a level that both mum and dad or the parent and guardian are really comfortable with. And I do believe that sitting down as a family unit, having those conversations, discussing the platforms together, and making sure that it's set to a level that both parents are comfortable with, but also that that young person is comfortable with as well. Because yes, the platforms do give people the opportunity to express themselves, to be creative, and there's no doubting that we've seen some great uses of the technology as well, in particular TikTok. But there are those risks that we do need to manage, that we do need to mitigate as much as possible as parents. And I would encourage parents who are maybe have concerns about the TikTok platform to take a look at some of those blog posts. I did a video recently which takes you through a walkthrough on how you can actually connect your TikTok account to your child's TikTok account so that you can avail of those parental controls.
Yeah, I mean, it just, even having the conversation, my mind is spiraling to, in so many different ways in which our young people are vulnerable through these platforms. And as you say, it's important to manage risk and to empower our young people. I remember a parent saying to me recently, she said, my kind of barometer is that, would I be happy for my child standing in a nightclub, or a pub or wherever else it might be, dressed in that particular way, dancing in that particular way, engaging in that particular way? And if my answer to that is no, then it doesn't happen online.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to look at it. But I also think as well, we have different people who will have different barometers, in the sense that what's acceptable and you know this as well as I do. And that's why it's very difficult. And we have then, and I have this debate in my own house that, let's say from my point of view with my children, there are certain apps that my children aren't using right now, Joanne, but there are other parents who have children of similar age and their children are using these apps. So that presents then a challenge in my home then. Well, such and such is allowed to use that app, Dad, and why can't we? So you get into these sort of debates, and that sort of presents a bigger challenge for parents as well, because they don't want their children and young people to be excluded and left out from these conversations, maybe that are taking place on platforms such as TikTok as well. So that's where I do feel that the education is really important for parents as well, that they are aware of these risks and these dangers, because as me and you have talked about before, there is no social media platform or app for that matter in the world that is 100% safe. It just doesn't exist. We're sometimes lulled into a false sense of security that, but sure, they can set up all the privacy settings and that will keep them safe. If you've been accepting friend requests from people who are not who they say they are, and the reality of it is, there are many of those people that operate in the online space. There are people who will use technology and social media and the internet to exploit children and young people. We have to be aware of those risks and those dangers, and we just have to understand that we do as parents have to mitigate them as best we can. One of the best things that we can do, and one of the best forms of defence that we have, is the information that people like myself, yourself, are creating to support parents. I've never said ever once that a parent needs to be an online safety expert. But you just need to understand where the risks are. And I always go back to myself as a child. My parents used to say to me all the time, when you go to the parkway and don't talk to strangers, if somebody comes up to you and hands you a packet of sweets and says, get into the car, you should never do that. You should always come home. I always take that into the online space right now. Never talk to strangers. And there are strangers in the online space. So that advice, that guidance that we would have got as children ourselves, actually is still relevant today in the technology space.
Yeah, but I guess, yeah, and I guess we also need to add layers to that and say, well, don't talk to strangers, don't let strangers see you, don't, it's all of those kind of things, and particularly for young children. I know you said the messaging element of TikTok was not as accessible for under 16s. What's the actual age limit on the app?
13.
13. Okay.
Yeah. So you have, and that's actually a good point, because many of these apps you will have different age profiles. Like WhatsApp, for example, is 16. Like YouTube is 16. But many people are on YouTube way before they're 16. We've got this, we do, and we have the digital age of consent in the Republic of Ireland, which means no children should be on social media until they're 16. Now, I'm in schools regularly in the Republic of Ireland, and and again, I know, as do parents, as do schools, as do teachers, know that young people are getting access to social media from a younger age. So we do just have to be aware of what the apps are, what are the age parameters on those platforms, and just make sure that if we do have young people going on to such apps before a certain age, that we understand those dangers and those risks as parents.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, in any form of risk, there's no way that we can do away with risk completely. I mean, there's risk getting into your car and driving. And we still do things that require an element of risk. It's part of life. We can never make anything 100% safe. I mean, even, in the first few weeks when we were all confined to home, people were saying, don't take ladders out and don't start doing things. So, even in the four walls of our own home, there are risks, and they'll always be there. I think the two important points for me that you've mentioned there are knowledge and communication. Parents, we need, or as adults around, and that includes parents, that includes teachers, that includes youth workers, and all adults around. We have a responsibility to inform ourselves around these technologies and to kind of try and understand them as best we can, not to be the expert, but to reach out to the experts and ask for their advice and their support and to follow their guidance. And then secondly, to have a conversation. I remember reading something a number of years ago, and it was around actually access to material online and things like that as well for children across a spectrum of topics. And the advice given was that, when you're ready to have these quite hard-hitting conversations at your kitchen table, and some of the topics were certainly, quite out there for maybe a lot of homes that I don't imagine would be talked about, then it's not really the right time to give your child access to a device where they can get that information. And also the other piece that really stuck with me was just about children and young people in general, is that the first time they hear about something is the time that it will impact them the most. So if the first time they hear about a particular app is from a peer who is, encouraging them to use it, then that's the story they're going to believe. If they hear about an app from a parent who has concerns about it, then they're probably going to stick with and believe that story a little bit more than if we're being reactive with these things. So and I know this is a minefield for parents, because the children know, like, they're streets ahead in terms of some of the devices, but communication, and you talked about those conversations at home being such an important part of this jigsaw puzzle.
Massively, and that's really important. And I think that we don't need to be going back to that point of oh well, I don't know anything about these apps, or I don't know anything about the internet, and God, I'm way behind, and absolutely, the reality of it is I'm way behind too, and that's me, who's involved in this space day in, day out. I mean, I'm always sort of playing catch up whenever I hear about a new app, whether it's a piece of work that I did in schools, or a parent has reached out to me and says, do you know anything about the Discord app? And all of these different apps that are, emerging on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. You don't need to be an expert across all of them. And really where I'm trying to say to people to just understand what the app's kind of about, some of the features within it, and then sort of just find an opportunity that if that app is being used within your home, that you can have a conversation about what might be some of the risks, and always try to use age appropriate examples. That's really important. I can't stress that enough. We seem to have this approach when it comes to online safety, that we talk about it very general across all ages. And we seem to forget that if you're a 17-year-old, the risks are different than if you're a 5-year-old, and all in between as well. There are things about privacy that you need to be talking about. There are things about about stranger danger that you need to be talking about. I mean, I'm not saying that you should be having conversations with a 17-year-old about stranger danger, because those conversations would have already been had, but you would want to be talking to the 16 or 17-year-old about indecent images, sharing the likes of that type of content online. You would want to be talking about privacy as well, online reputation, how this could impact your future career. And that's what I mean when I talk about age appropriate examples. I'm not going to be talking to a 5-year-old about online reputation and why that might impact future career opportunities, because the reality of it is, yes, at some point they'll need to think about that, but that's very far down the line for them right now. But I would talk to them about, posting personal information online. I would talk about not accepting friend requests on Fortnite or whatever it is from people you don't know. Those are simple things that can be delivered to a young person who's maybe 7, 8, 9, and you can evolve that conversation. So I'm a big fan, Joanne, of evolving the conversation as the young person starts to get older, and then moving into those age-appropriate examples that are relevant to their age.
Yeah. And I think, and I suppose even as you're saying that, the age appropriate thing is so important to make it absolutely that this feels real to me, that so then they act on it. If you've got one or two things that you need to act on that make sense to you, then you're absolutely much more likely to do it. You mentioned there kind of 16, 17, and I'm guessing it's not just at this stage that you would be having these conversations. And I just want to maybe clarify that for some people that are listening in, in terms of sharing indecent images. I would be of the belief that those conversations need to happen much younger. I am going to go surprisingly, and at myself, I'm saying surprisingly, at sort of the 10, 11, 12 age group, based on some of the stories and some of the things that I've heard happening. So that shocked me, to be honest. But again, in an age appropriate way. But these things are happening younger and younger.
They are. And I think what's important to understand is the language that's used as well. So if you talk to maybe a 12, 11-year-old, 10-year-old, they're maybe not going to be able to understand what is an indecent image, but they'll certainly understand maybe what a personal image is or a private image is. So it's very important that we get the language right when we're talking to younger users of technology as well, so that they can really understand what you mean by that and what that might be used for in the online space. And there is no doubt that people who operate in the online space, who are trying to coerce a young person into creating or sharing such image, will be aware of how to do that. And as children and young people get older, we would want to certainly be talking about the impact as well around indecent images, about, when we're speaking to 16, 17-year-olds, about that impact as well, and how that can progress.
And I guess the legal implications of some of that material and stuff as well. And I think as well, it's also important for parents maybe to be aware and to be mindful that those types of requests aren't always coming from somebody that the child doesn't know. It may be a peer, which again, in some of the situations that I would be aware of, certainly that has been, it has been a girlfriend, or it has been a boyfriend, or it has been someone in their peer group. I mean, we've heard of the headline ones where it's done for blackmail and those kind of things, by by people, further afield, much further away. And as you've mentioned before, people that do this as part of whatever they do. But it can often happen within peer groups as well.
And absolutely, that's the case, and sometimes that it happens that way. So parents need to be aware of that as well. Maybe it's an older teen who has encouraged or coerced a younger teen into sharing an image or creating an image. Maybe if you've got an older teen who's 18, who's maybe encouraged a 16-year-old to partake in that. So again, you have all the legal ramifications in and around that people just need to be aware of. That older teen who's 18 is now an adult in the eyes of the law, and an offence has been committed. So it is important for people just to be aware of that. And I think that's where those conversations are really important, and getting those age appropriate examples in place as early as possible, and evolving that conversation as well. And that's something that I found to be very beneficial particularly when you're delivering this type of education in schools. If you're talking to a group of 16 to 17-year-olds, then all of the examples have got to be relevant to their age profile. Otherwise, they're not going to necessarily take it seriously enough. And that's where it's important that the delivery of this type of education is so important. And then giving parents as well, because parents will have in their home, like they might have a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old, but they also have a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a 9-year-old. So it is important as well that the information that those parents are getting is as rounded as possible as it can be, but also that if a parent needs to seek out specific information relevant to a particular age profile, that they can get access to those resources. And what we try to do is produce that content in as a user-friendly way as possible. And I always think that's really important. Give takeaways, you know.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's as we go into that, it can feel, as I said, you know, I have a tendency with some of it, even simple things. And I am going to say they should be simple, you know, updating virus software on my computer, things like that. It just feels like, the risk maybe isn't in front of me. And I guess it's very a useful analogy at the moment. But, you know, we're up until now when we talked about viruses, maybe we only talked about them for computers, but we're talking about them a lot more now. But it feels to me sometimes that it's almost too much. So rather than it be anything, I do nothing. And, you know, so as you said, that making that content easy and accessible, and we can get overwhelmed as well if we're getting information from tons of different resources. So, you know, I would kind of, for any topic, sort of choose the resources carefully that work for me, whilst keeping kind of an open mind and all of that. But make sure that I'm not getting bombarded with stuff from loads of different angles, because that can always feel like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. And then you just spiral and end up kind of doing nothing really. But lots of, hopefully the conversation this morning, because I think it's one of these things, these types of conversations for me remind me a bit of the analogy where people say, you know, motivation doesn't last, and neither does washing yourself. You know, people tend to hear a talk, go to a talk in school, listen to what's going on and take action from that point. And then life takes over, things get busy, and we kind of can easily sort of slip off that space a little bit. So I think it's important that maybe now people think a little bit, pause, look at unsupervised exercise time, unsupervised access to devices, what's going on, what filters are there in the home, and all of those types of things. So hopefully we've stimulated some conversation. If anybody does have any questions for Wayne, you can, you know, you can contact him through his social media platforms, or pop them even into the comments box here on the show, and we'll certainly deal with those and get back with those as well. So Wayne, thanks a million for your time today. Have you any final things that you'd like to share, or anything that you'd like to just wrap up with?
Yeah, I suppose if I could just sort of give a little bit of a summary, I think just what people just need to just always keep at the back of their mind. Just because you don't see the risk doesn't mean it's not there. If you're crossing the road, just because you can't see the car doesn't mean it's not there somewhere. It could come out of a side lane, it could come out of a side road, and you know you could be involved in an accident. So the risks are everywhere, and there's no doubt about that. That just before the COVID-19, after the COVID-19, we're still going to have all of these risks, and we got to manage these risks as best we can. I understand that when it comes to online safety, sometimes what we're talking about this morning, Joanne, can be difficult for people to discuss. There's no doubt about it. But it is important that we have these discussions as much as possible. We want to make sure that children and young people in our care can come forward if something goes wrong. They can sit with mum and dad, they can sit with a parent or guardian, they can get support from a counsellor, and that support is there. We always want to keep that in mind, that we want to encourage young people to have discussions and conversations about something that may have happened in that online space. You know, I'm not going to judge. You're certainly not going to judge. People aren't going to judge, but there's always help and there's always support available. And please keep that in mind from a parental perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wayne, thanks a million for your time, and I look forward to chatting to you again soon. I'm sure there'll be questions coming in that maybe we'll revisit in another show as well. Thank you to our viewers for watching in, for your comments coming up there on the screen. I've been able to catch some of those, so thank you for your feedback. And to Destination Uri for hosting. I will be back on Monday. Remembering what days of the week it is can sometimes be a challenge, but I will be back on Monday with another guest and some other topics as well. Wayne, take care, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks a million.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you.